Everybody, it's Casual Boops coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be doing Get Good episode 14. And this entire episode is going to be about everything about ammo types. And you'll see in the GIF there, we're talking about the various different types of ammo. Some of these are in the game and some of them aren't exactly, but there's four types of ammo that are in the game. There's armor piercing, AP. There's armor piercing composite rigid, APCR. There's heat, high explosive anti-tank, and then there's high explosive. And then some people, there's some things that are called HESH rounds, high explosive squash head. But in the game of World of Tanks, there's no functional mechanical difference between just high explosive and other high explosive. It's just that normally people call things HESH rounds when it's just a higher penetration round. But anyways, I'm going to get into the specifics of why you would use each of those rounds, what they're good at, what they're bad at, how they behave just in general. And I was going to make this like part of like a beginner part of an episode, but there's enough to cover here that this is just a whole video. Yeah, there's just a lot. So we'll just get right into it now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about here, I want to say this. I'm going to start this with a caveat. Just about everything that I'm about to say here has exceptions because this game is very complicated. And there's a lot of tanks with a lot of different things and so on and so forth. And so some of the things that I'm about to say will apply most of the time, and some of them will, and there will be exceptions to it too. So just take that with a grain of salt, and I'll try to cover some of that, but this is just going to be a general kind of thing. The other thing is, like, wargaming is not very good at balance, and so because of that, the standard round that a tank gets will almost always be not as good as the premium round that a tank gets, and so oftentimes there isn't really a reason to choose a certain ammo type, right? You're almost always better off just shooting premium rounds because that's just what it is. But there are some tanks where it is a good choice. Like there's a reason to choose one over the other. Like the BZ-176 has AP round standard and has a high explosive round as a premium round. So you don't always want to be shooting high explosive rounds depending on what you're shooting at and stuff. So that there are times where things are balanced better, even though that tank is not balanced. But anyway, the point is the ammo type, you have to choose intelligently which ammo type that you want to shoot at a given target to optimize your performance. And so we'll just start with that. A lot of times, if you've got an APCR standard round and an APCR premium round, well, then the premium one's better. That's just how it is. But I'm going to try to talk about why that might not always be true and the little quirks that go along with each of these different ammo types. So we'll start with armor piercing, AP rounds. And I apologize, I'm just gonna read this to you, I guess, but like I'll give you examples and stuff. The advantages of armor piercing rounds are, I'm gonna use this word in a couple different places, normalization, right? And I will link a video right now. You should be seeing it on somewhere, one of these corners, where I talk briefly, I think it's intermediate tip number 2, where I talk about what normalization is and how it works. The long story short is AP rounds, they don't mind angled armor quite as much. APCR rounds have worse normalization, so what that means is they have a hissy fit whenever you shoot anything that isn't flat. They bounce off of shit all the time. It's really annoying. AP rounds don't have quite as much of that problem, so they will generally penetrate better if there's two angled surfaces and you have the same round with the same penetration and everything, except one shooting AP and one shooting APCR. The AP round is more likely to go in. So it likes angled armor a little bit better. It also does not care about tracks or spaced armor. You don't have to worry about, hitting random debris. You can shoot through fences and obstacles and things. And so it doesn't care about that. The disadvantage is typically AP rounds have a slower shell velocity. This is not always true. It's based on the tank. One tank's AP round might be faster than another tank's APCR round, but that's all about balance. It just depends, but typically AP rounds will have lower cell velocity. All right, moving on to APCR. APCR typically will have a higher shell velocity. This is not always true, but it is usually the case where APCR usually has better shell velocity. It also does, for the same reason AP rounds, doesn't care about tracks or spaced armor as much, right? If armor is very thick, it doesn't matter if it's spaced armor or not, but like, you don't have to worry about getting trolled by by tracks, and I'll go into some examples of this a little bit later. So if you're shooting at something like the side of something like that has really big, like the side of a 907 or the side of the side of things, super conk or something like that. You might switch out of your heat round and into an AP or an APCR round so that you can make sure that you don't get trolled by spaced armor, because tracks count as spaced armor. Or an IS-7 is a really good example because it's got that black hole side armor where you shoot it and it just disappears. I don't know why, it just doesn't pen. And that'd be one of those reasons where you shoot AP or APCR. APCR downside is that it doesn't, like I said, it hates angly bits. You want to shoot something at as flat an angle as possible with APCR because it's more likely to bounce and it's more likely to just get pissy whenever you shoot something that's angled. Also, APCR usually has more penetration drop off with range, but this is also very tank dependent. And like tier 10 light tanks they have really bad penetration drop off with range. The GSOR tank destroyer, the tier 8 tank destroyer, has really, really bad penetration drop off with range. However, a lot of tanks, especially mid and low tier tanks, have AP rounds as standard rounds and APCR rounds as premium rounds. And the penetration drop off with range that you get with APCR is not enough to justify not using the premium round, if that makes any sense. And this is what I'm talking about with like terrible balancing, right? If you have a choice between AP and APCR, the APCR is probably always going to be the right choice if it's the premium round, even though you're getting drop off. Like you might go, the penetration drop off will not be as significant. You're still going to have a higher penetration, usually even at the maximum range, with a premium APCR than you would with a standard round AP. There it is. Now I've said it. So the penetration drop off with range is a thing, but that doesn't overcome the benefits of premium rounds usually. So there's something. Heat rounds, high explosive anti-tank. The advantages is it really, really likes sloped armor. Most rounds will auto bounce at, I think it's 70 degrees at an angle. If an angle is very well armored, let's see. If you're not triple overmatching, and there's another video that I'll link right now about overmatching. If you're not overmatching, APCR will auto bounce at a certain angle, and APCR will auto bounce at another less steep angle. So that's what I mean about hissy fits with flat things. But heat rounds do not auto bounce. They either pen or they don't pen. And so because of that, if it's, I think 85 degrees is the max. So it's really, really, really hard to get a heat round to bounce. It can not penetrate, but it's very rare that it bounces because it will penetrate up to 85 degrees, which is 5 degrees off of parallel. So what I'm saying is if somebody's side scraping and they have weak side armor and you have a heat round, you're probably going to go in because unless they're flat on, it's crazy. So what that means is things like STRVs that rely on their slopey bits, or like the cupola of a super conqueror that's very slopey and very, it's not very well armored, but it's very sloped. So a heat round doesn't care about that slope because it's not gonna auto bounce, but it'll pen right through it. So heat likes sloped armor. High explosive anti-tank also doesn't lose penetration over distance at all. The penetration that it has when it comes out of the barrel is what it has at the end when it hits something. So that's really nice. If you're shooting really long range, a lot of times, again, you don't get the choice. Like you might switch away from, it's kind of a toss up because you will, I'll talk about it because the disadvantages are significant to heat rounds as well, but the penetration doesn't drop off with range. So that's really nice for hitting long targets. One of the drawbacks is that the shell velocity is kind of shit usually. Usually on a heat round, the shell velocity is slower, which makes hitting long range targets a little bit tougher. But if you do hit, you're probably going to pen unless you get trolled by tracks. So you can see heat is the one that is the most kind of iffy. Anyways, so no penetration over distance loss, no penetration loss over distance. Better penetration, that's not always true, but that's part of that is probably because it's mostly heat rounds are usually premium rounds. So I should probably just delete this. Because there are examples like the tier 5, I think it's the tier 5 IKV, the Swedish tank destroyer, has heat rounds for standard rounds and heat rounds for premium rounds. And so there's some where heat is just all they shoot. So anyways, the disadvantage is it gets eaten by destructible objects. If you shoot a heat round at a fence, or if you hit a tank behind a fence, it'll hit the fence and then it'll stop there. It'll explode because what's happening there, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Mechanically speaking, there's a reason for this. but it's basically a little time bomb, and you've started the time bomb when it hits the fence, and so it's gonna get eaten by destructible objects. Um, Tracks and spaced armor. I had a hard time like proving this, right? Because like a lot of times the premium rounds that you get with a spaced armor protects against heat rounds, but you can still overcome that with very high penetration or very high caliber heat rounds. So I had a hard time choosing, showing that, but I'll show that in a video here. The easiest way to describe that is what I've just, it tracks and spaced armor, especially because tracks act like spaced armor, can troll you by absorbing heat rounds in ways that you wouldn't expect otherwise. Yeah, so there's that. Obviously, like I said before, the slow shell velocity is not so great, so these are reasons you might not use it. High explosive. And also this counts for HESH rounds. These are the same, really. They're functionally identical. The advantages: you again do not lose penetration with distance. The same penetration that you have at the start is the same that you have at the end. You get higher damage, but only if you penetrate. Right. So if you don't pen, you don't do nearly as much. And there's complex calculations about how that all the damage is calculated. But the way that's done mostly now is when I say mostly, I mean artillery plays by their own rules, and I believe the HE rounds in Steel Hunter behave by the same rules that artillery play by in main battles, right, in random battles. But regular tanks have different rules where they kind of almost act like armor piercing rounds, where they look at the armor that is behind the part that you shot, and then they do the calculation based on that. Which is not necessarily accurate, but whatever. They're really good for base resets, because even if you hit a track or something like that and you knock a track off, or if you hit something that's thinner or whatever, you don't have to pen to do 50 damage, and that'll reset a base. So that's really good to have high explosive around for that kind of thing, because it can be really useful. It also doesn't care, for whatever reason, fuck you physics, we don't care, World of Tanks engine, they changed it, so when they changed HE, it doesn't care about tracks and spaced armor and destructible objects. You can shoot through all of that because physics, whatever. So this has no bearing on reality. It doesn't really make any sense to me, but this is how the game is right now. High explosive doesn't care about destructible objects, and it can shoot through tracks and spaced armor. So the disadvantages to high explosive are that it usually has slower shell velocity, right? It's a lot of those are like howitzers. If you've seen those, like the tier 4 Matilda has the option to run like a 3-inch howitzer, and the thing is like chucking a football. It's like, so that's slow shell velocity. Also, you usually get low penetration in your HE rounds, which makes it that much harder to penetrate. You're not usually penetrating things frontally with HE rounds. But then again, a lot of the times Wargaming has recently been putting out tanks that have high penetration HE rounds. This is not necessarily a new thing, but it's become a lot more prevalent. Like the shit barn has been a thing for quite some time. Shit barn has been around for a while, and it's got HE rounds that have 230 millimeters of pen, which is really good for the game. And then of course you've got the BZ-176 that has high pen HE rounds, and you've got the Gonzalo that has high pen HE rounds. So those are really, really good, because you get all these benefits. Right, no pen loss over distance. You get really high damage. You get lots of module damage. I didn't even talk about module damage, but you also don't care about tracks or spaced armor. You get to reset bases. You get all this stuff, but you still get high penetration. It's kind of dumb. So I'm not trying to say shoot high explosive all the time, because there'll be times where if you shoot high explosive at, I'll just show you. So now that I've talked about all these things, I will now show you, because I have the power. So here we go. Here's an example of Pay no attention to the jacked up the ears on the Kampfpanzer. I'm in an STA-2 and I'm shooting at a Kampfpanzer here. And here I'm about to shoot AP rounds at a very, very steep angle on the turret of a Kampfpanzer out of my STA-2. So here we go. You see it auto bounces, it ricochets. It doesn't not penetrate, it says ricochet. And now I'm loading a heat round, and it goes in, because heat rounds will not bounce unless they'll not ricochet unless it's like 85 degrees, so almost never. And so because of that, The heat round says, okay, what is the what's the armor here? It's 80 degrees and it's angled and stuff, and penetration on the STA2 has 270, so it overcomes that. It nails it. So it's really good for well-angled stuff where an AP round will just automatically bounces, as you can see. Let me see here. The last part of this that I want to talk about is heat rounds sometimes get trolled by spaced armor, and sometimes your barrel can act like a spaced armor, and AP rounds don't. So I'm going to reload an AP round right now, and you'll see as I look at the barrel, shooting an AP round, I can go right through the debris, and in this case, the debris is the barrel. And then you can see the reticle going from green to red, and back and forth. With a heat round, I hit the barrel acts as spaced armor, and then the heat round doesn't go through the turret, even though the armor on that turret is very weak, because the impact point from the at the point of the barrel was so far away from the turret. That's why it works, right? So spaced armor on tanks doesn't necessarily work as well because it's right there. And the distance, that's part of the reason the STRV-103B, the tier 10 Striv, that tank has a fence on the front of it. And the reason the fence works so well is because when tanks shoot at it with heat rounds, the distance between the point of impact on that fence and the actual tank armor is very, very far, compared to like a Super Conqueror turret, where the distance between the spaced armor shield on the outside of the turret and the actual armor of the turret is relatively close. I don't know what it is, maybe a foot or so. And so the spaced armor on the Super Conch doesn't work quite as well because it's not quite so far away. But in this case, because the barrel is acting like spaced armor and barrel blocking is a thing, you raise your barrel up and you block your cupola. In this case, that acts as spaced armor and with a very far distance. So that's one thing. Let me see here. Talking about HE pens. Let me see here. So, here's what you don't want to do. We've got another gain here. So I've got HE rounds loaded, and if you don't shoot, if it's really good for base resets because you can shoot somebody, shoot a Super Conch in the side of the turret and still do 54 damage. That would have been a base reset. But you'll notice if I shoot something that's got low armor, like this Barask, I can do 465 as a patent. That's insane. Like, you just eat things for breakfast. But again, the APCR round, like the HE rounds, really only shine when you shoot at something that's got low armor, or at least you know that you can penetrate. So I would say HE rounds are the tank ammunition. Excuse me, the tank ammunition that most rewards a player for knowing what to shoot and what not to shoot. Because if you pick an HE round and you're just shooting it at everything, like a Super Conch and a whatever, you're not going to do very well. Maybe you'll get lucky with one shot one time. But if you know what to do and you're say, oh, that's a Barask, I can pen that. Oh, that's a Grill 15, I know I can pen that. You know, an STA2, that's got no armor at all, I can pen that with my HE rounds. If you pick the ammo type specifically for your thin-skinned enemies, you will have a very, very good day. If you don't, if you just shoot HE at everything, sometimes you'll get lucky, and a lot of times you'll do nothing, and you may not understand why. You should come watch this video, but whatever. Okay, so there's that, and then the other thing is I want to talk more about this. So here's a perfect example again. I'm shooting APCR rounds at the cupola of a Super Conch, and I'm taking perfectly good aim. I'm just sitting here aiming at it at the flattest part that I can, but because it's APCR and because that cupola is very, very well angled, I can't pin that thing at all. I've tried 3 times now. If I had AP rounds, I think I would be penning, right? But APCR even hates those angles. It has a hissy fit, so it just doesn't pen worth a shit. I can't do anything about that because the angle is too steep. Yeah, and so now if I think I'm going to try it again here. Yeah, so in this case, I'm just aiming. Yeah, that's a viewfinder. That doesn't count. That's not actually counting as armor. That's just a viewfinder. So if I yeah, here we go. We're aiming. Like, even at the very base, as low as it can possibly be. And if I had gotten a better angle, then maybe I could have penned. But at this angle, I'm just on flat ground. If I've got heat rounds now, all of a sudden, heat rounds don't care about the angle of the cupola. Heat rounds are going to go through. They're going to say, this is only 225 thick, and I've got 330 penetration. I'm going in all day. So that's why we're 2 for 2 with heat rounds, because this is it's a thin, well-angled cupola. So you can imagine this cupola acts just like a Striv. or like the forehead of an E75. If you look at that, it's not very thick, but it is well angled, and so heat rounds will butter that, but APCR rounds will bounce off of it. So that's just one example of that. The last thing I wanted to talk about here is okay. So okay, so heat rounds into the tracks. So this is going to be a function, like I said, a function of distance. So that was a heat round into the tracks of an iron Arnie with a Patton. Patton has pretty good heat rounds. They're 330 penetration, but you can see, that because I'm shooting even at the side of the tank, and the heat, the high, what am I trying to say? The spaced armor is on the outside of the tracks, so that creates even more distance. So it's a function of there's that much more armor, and also there's some distance to it. So it's a function. It's function of both of those things. Now, in that particular case, because we had the same distance, but I just got a high roll for penetration, it didn't work that time. But this time it did. So it's armor is always going to be this roll because there's 25% penetration RNG. But you can see right now, if I loaded, well, I'm going to go back. When I have heat rounds, you can see the penetration indicator here shows my 330 penetration versus the 382 armor value on the side armor of the tank, plus the spaced armor of the tracks and the outside of the armor, the side skirt, right? But then as soon as I load, and you see 426 and so on, that's all that has to do with armor and things like that, and angles. If I load AP rounds, or in this case APCR rounds, I've got 268 pen, but all of a sudden that space from the effective armor of the distance, you know what I mean? Like the not like APCR and AP rounds don't care about the distance between obstacles and things. So because of that, I don't care how far away the tracks are. I'm shooting you through the tracks into your side armor. So because of that, you see the effective armor of the Iron Arnie on the side drops to 206 rather than whatever it was before, 400 or 335 or something like that. So we're going to go and we're going to aim, and we're going in every time we're going in with the APCR rounds. So this is just a perfect example, an embodiment of what I'm trying to get at, is that heat rounds they sometimes get trolled by tracks and spaced armor, and the degree of their effectiveness has to do with the penetration of the APC, or the penetration values of the heat rounds, the caliber of the heat rounds, how thick the spaced armor is, and how far away the spaced armor is. So there's 4 factors at play, which is why, Jaegeru shooting the side of shooting the turret of a super conch is still going to go in probably, because the heat rounds are super penetrating, if that makes any sense. But if they were less, you know what I mean? So those are the factors to keep in mind. So that, yeah. Anyways, I've talked enough. Hopefully this is helpful. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. If anybody has any questions, just feel free to add. Feel free to drop something in the comments. If you like this, let me know. If you hated this, if there's something else that's confusing you, let me know, and we'll make that a subject of a later video. So, all right, that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. All right, bye.